Right, today I'm joined by Warren Farrell over in America. So welcome, Warren. Warren is the
Thank
joint
you.
author of this excellent book, The Boy Crisis. I'd strongly recommend it. Now, we're going to be talking about issues relating to boys, fathers, and Warren's got a lot of fascinating insights and information about that to share with us. So welcome, Warren. So start off, would you like to tell us a little bit about your sort of intellectual journey and your career that's brought you to this point?
Yes, started with being born, and, and then the most relevant portion is that I was deeply involved with the women's movement. I had somewhat of a similar, I was deeply involved with the women's movement. I had somewhat of a similar background to some of the people in the UK who have started out with women with women's issues like Erin Pizzey, and then started to see that there were challenges not just with women but also with men and boys. And when I was with the women's movement, I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, and was speaking all around the world as, I suppose, probably the world's leading male feminist, and expressing perspectives on the feminist issues that I hope that I could contribute to secure men. And was very, very happy in that role. But then in the mid 70s, I began to see that there were a lot of divorces, and I started to see the early research that the children of divorce that did not have father involvement were doing considerably worse than the children of divorce that did have father involvement. And so I brought this up to my colleagues on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City. And it was like, they were all the ones that were supporting me to do speaking engagements, recommending me around the world. And this was very, very lucrative, and to say the least. And so, but this time the response was just a general freezing of like, what are you saying, Warren? And I'm saying, well, when there's a divorce, that children really need their dads. And they said, well, we should let women make that decision. Women are usually more involved with the children. They should be the ones making the decision as to whether the children should be with their dads, their moms, or both. Any woman's gonna, who has a good dad, not one that isn't involved in domestic violence and things like that, is certainly going to want the husband to be involved. So she'll make the right choice. And I said, well, that's like saying, the doctors know what the medical profession is like, and that what women have to contribute that's different. That the male doctors should make the decisions about whether the female doctors should be involved or not. That the male doctors know best, and they would never do anything that was wrong. We see that everybody is territorial about the things that they take mastery of or have primary responsibility for. But the important thing is not that intellectual argument, is that the data here is showing that the children who don't have their dads are doing worse in 5 or 6 different areas that I was able to point out at the time. In the meantime, when I did the research for the boy crisis, it turned out it was more than 50 developmental areas that children who didn't have father involvement sort of did much worse in, and including suicide, depression, addictions to everything. I can get into that in a moment. But at this point in time, there were only 5 or 6 that were sort of had significant statistical significance that could be argued for. So I could feel this sort of collective, sigh on the part of my board members, and as if to say, like, Warren, I thought you were for us, as if being in favor of fathers was being against the other members of now. And they said, well, you admit yourself that the research is only, in its infancy stage. Why don't you go ahead and do more research? And I could see that the cue was clearly, if you do more research and you find out that really children do best when they live with their mothers, or whatever the mother decides is the way children will do best, good, no problem at all. But if your research leads to findings that the children do significantly better with their dads, that's going to be a problem. And so what I knew was that I had international fame at that point, and also was making very decent money, and I knew that was going to be the end of that road if I started to find that the fathers were really important. And yet I also, was getting my PhD and felt that, at least I had some economic security and that I really wanted to live a life in integrity. And I would try to follow the research and report what I found. Well, the more I did research for what eventually became the Boy Crisis book, the more I found that children both needed their fathers in more than 50 developmental areas, but that boys' level of suffering was significantly greater than girls. There are some differences and mostly similarities. So both boys and girls were likely to be depressed, but boys were much more likely to have that depression get deeper and deeper and lead to things like addiction to video games and addiction to porn, and addiction to drugs and addiction to alcohol and withdrawal and depression that was covered up much more effectively than girls' depression was covered up. So we were measuring depression as if it was more frequent in girls, but in fact, if you measure depression in a way that was applicable to boys' style of depression, then you had greater levels of depression in boys and much greater level of suicide. And so I started, looking at things like the suicide statistics and seeing that in the US and I believe the UK as well, boys and girls at the age of 9, they rarely commit suicide, and they commit suicide about equally. But between the ages of 10 and 14, boys' suicide rate becomes twice that of girls. Between the ages of 15 and 19, boys' suicide rate becomes 4 times that of girls. Between the ages of 20 and 25, boys' suicide rate becomes about 5 times that of girls. And so I saw that the combination of testosterone and the male role and the messages to men that you don't talk about your feelings, you don't cry, plus that the males that did not have a dad as a role model didn't get direction as to how to be a healthy, effective father. The women, the girls at least, that lived with their mothers, at least they had a same-sex role model, and girls had a lot more permission to cry and express their feelings, and the mother would understand those feelings because they had a history of having those feelings, and they would empathize with them. And so while their girls without dads did suffer, as I said, in about 50 plus developmental areas, the intensity of their suffering was less. They didn't commit the suicide more as much. They didn't in the United States, the deaths from opioids deaths are more than twice that of girls, and so we for boys. And so, we were seeing all sorts of problems that boys were having. And so, I started asking a new set of questions, which was, why are dads so important? What do dads do that are different than what moms do? And is it, just a biological thing, or is it also that the parenting styles of dads and moms are different? And if so, what are those differences? And, should there be all father type parenting styles for boys and all mother type for girls? Or, is what I call checks and balance parenting, is that the best? And if it's the best, is it best for boys? Is it best for girls? Is it best for both? And so those were the questions I set out exploring when I started to do the research for the Boy Crisis.
When you started looking at those issues, were you expecting the sort of reaction that you got? The ostracism, the hostility. Just this afternoon, I was watching a video of some protesters at an event where you were speaking at a university, and they're absolutely shouting obscenities, screaming, and whatever. Just appalling. And you got this sort of brick wall from various avenues where previously you'd had opportunities. I mean, were you expecting that, or were you surprised by that?
I have to say I was surprised by this. I mean, these women on the board of NOW, the leading feminists, I was significantly responsible for Bella Abzug's becoming a congresswoman. I was good friends with Gloria Steinem. Betty Friedan would come over to my home. We would talk about a book that ended up becoming a book that she wrote called The Second Stage. So these were people that I felt were friends, but I started to understand as I got older and more mature, I guess, that there's a difference between ideological colleagues and friends, and that friends really are people who understand your integrity, and even if you differ with them, they remain friends with you because they see that there's somebody there that has integrity, and that becomes more important than ideological affinity. And so I was really, I have to say, maybe I was naive, but I was kind of sad and shocked and lonely. I mean, these were, this group of people, mostly women, constituted 90% of my friends. And so I basically didn't just lose ideological colleagues. I didn't just lose the ability to speak all around the world and to be on any TV show I wrote, right? Any TV show I wanted, basically, and to do and to be able to write for the New York Times as often as I wanted. But all of that disappeared, and I went from 50 plus speaking engagements per year at universities down to 0. And so it was, so it had an impact on my income, an impact on my belief in what friends were, and it left me feeling lonely, I have to say. And so it was hard.
These sort of stories, they always make me assume that people like yourself will be the tip of the iceberg, but there'll be another vast number who've started following the same thought processes, but have thought, no, I'll stay with a comfortable life. Yes. It's a massive problem in an open democratic society when there's a culture that's just preventing certain viewpoints. I mean, your story is obviously very similar to our chairman, Neil Linden, who I know you've met. But his similar, that peak of his career, crest of a wave, then says some things that feminists take issue with, and suddenly it's all over. You're back at the bottom rung of the ladder. Just to say here at this point, Warren's written a chapter in Neil Linden's new book called Epiphanies, and Warren goes into a lot more detail about his experiences, the way that impacted his career. I've just read that today. Very interesting. I'll put a link below if you're interested in that. I'll put a link below to Warren's Boy Crisis book as well. So you've outlined some of the phenomenon that you think constitute the boy crisis, and you mentioned already fatherlessness or lack of father engagement as a major factor. What specifically are the consequences of lack of father engagement, would you say?
Well, your audience is sophisticated and mature, so I'm going to get to some of the amazing stuff that requires a bit more sophistication. Recently, there was a study done of telomeres, and telomeres are the part in your cells part of your cells that contain the genes that allow you to have the ability to prevent cancer, the ability to prevent heart disease, and if the longer your telomeres are, the more of those genes that prevent problems are contained in it. And so telomeres, when a child is 9.5 years of age, are the single best predictor of the life expectancy of the child. And so scientists began to discuss, to sort of like try to see what was connected with having longer versus shorter telomeres. And after studying dozens and dozens of variables, the only one that they came up with that had a very significant impact was that children that had minimum father involvement at the age of 9.5. Those children had telomeres that were on average 14% shorter. But as they looked more carefully and they divided the female to the male population, they found that not only was the average telomere of the average 9.5-year-old child without father involvement was 14% shorter, but boys' telomeres were yet again 40% shorter than the girls. So the life expectancy of a child not exposed to their dad, their biological dad, had an impact that had a 14% shorter life expectancy, but boys' life expectancy was yet again 40% shorter than the girls. And that is both scientifically accurate, but also it's a metaphor for the type of impact that a lack of father involvement has, and B, the disproportionate impact that it has on boys versus girls. And there were just dozens and dozens of examples like this that were not available in the research back when I was dealing with the boy, what became the boy crisis, but with the now board of directors. And so and this is what fascinated me as I started doing the research for the boy crisis, this type of finding. But I think one of the other things that fascinated, go ahead, you were about to say something.
I was just going to say, that's fascinating. That's just the sort of issue that those sort of statistics, influence on life expectancy. That's just the sort of thing that would be discussed in the Scottish Parliament if there was any other cause.
Yes.
Any other cause that would be top of the agenda. What are we going to do about this? Let's throw money at it or whatever. But because it's something in this area, no interest at all, not on the agenda at all.
Absolutely. I've been working. I created a coalition to create a White House Council on Boys and Men. I created that coalition under the Obama administration. There never became a White House Council on Boys and Men, but because of my background with the National Organization for Women, I was called by the White House and said, "Would you be on an advisory board for the White House Council on Women and Girls?" And I said, "Of course, but there's also a need for a White House Council on Boys and Men." And they said, "Well," the person who called me said, "I'm only authorized to appoint people to the advisory board, but if you want to get together a coalition of, if you want to make a proposal for a White House Council on Boys and Men, I'll send it up the ladder." And so I said, "Great." And I got together 32 of the most knowledgeable people in the United States about boys and men's issues, and the head of the Boy Scouts, the head of Men's Health magazine, and so on. And we spent 18 months hammering out a proposal to create a White House Council on Boys and Men. But long story short, the Obama administration never did anything with it. And so, and I'm more politically a little bit mostly on the liberal side, but there's many areas where I'm also on the conservative side. And one of those areas that I'm more on the conservative side is the importance of fathers and the importance of family. And so, but as head of the coalition, I went out to Iowa and interviewed 10 of the Democratic presidential candidates a year plus ago. And the Democratic presidential candidates that I interviewed were quite responsive to the idea of father involvement and understanding that boys were having problems. However, when it got to their campaign managers, the campaign managers warned them that they shouldn't come out and articulate much about this issue because they would lose the support of the feminist base, and that 53% of women who were under 30 in the United States who had children without being married, and most of those children who were raised without being married had minimal or no father involvement. And so you didn't want to alienate them, and you didn't want to alienate divorced mothers. And so push came to shove, and almost all the candidates backed out. But you can see on my YouTube channel the interviews with these presidential candidates and how responsive they were until it got down to push comes to shove. In the meantime, I'm speaking about the importance of father involvement to boys and girls, but especially to boys. And people from the Trump administration, from the White House, hear me talk and call me to speak at a fatherhood summit. And then that led to my meeting with 14 members of the White House and the Department of Justice and the HHS. And they're all, extremely responsive. And saying, "My goodness, this is really important findings." They all have copies of the Boy Crisis book. They're reading through it and say, "I can't believe this. This is wonderful. This is so important." So I said, "Okay, let's translate this into policy." And so they're talking now about doing that. But one of the policies that I'm talking about is creating a father warrior program. Not WOR. It's fathers and mothers don't both do plenty of worrying, but a father warrior program, and in which boys are educated from a very early age to see themselves as warriors, overcoming the barriers that society puts up for them to be full-time fathers if they wish to be, for them to be to identify primarily not just as a breadwinner but also as a father if that's their personality type, to encourage girls and women to consider that boys who have nurturing skills and emotional skills and are not just earning more money than they are potentially eligible to be married and to have children. And so to put that program out into the world, also to create a male teacher corps, which is because here's what I found is that boys who are raised without mothers in the home, boys who are raised without dads in the home, who go from basically female only homes to female only schools, those boys do very badly as statistically. However, boys who are raised in school and homes where there's a significant amount of father involvement, and they go to schools where there's a significant, where it's almost all of female teachers, um, there's impact, but not nearly as much impact. The solidity. So that's part of what allowed me to understand that the father involvement was more primary than other male role model involvements.
Right.
That isn't to say that other male role model involvements are not helpful. They're extremely helpful. Male coaches, getting kids involved in sports, getting kids involved in some equivalent in the UK of the Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts, very important. There's very mentorship is having mentors for boys is very important, and also boys. But more important than mentors is boys being mentors to younger boys. Boys who are mentors start seeing themselves as having responsibility to complete their homework, to do things with discipline, because they know that if they fail to do things well, they will look badly. They won't help the boy that they're helping out
Mhm.
effectively. And so they begin to take on type of a maturity that a parent takes on when they have somebody to mentor. And so
Yeah.
I discussed more of the reasons for that in the boy crisis, but just hold on to that. Also, faith-based organizations are very important for anyone that is a family with a faith-based background. It doesn't make any difference what your faith is, but look for two things. One is a faith-based leader who is able to be a good role model, but more importantly than the faith-based leader being a good role model is the faith-based leader being facilitative of getting your son together with other boys about his age and encouraging the boys to talk about what's really going on inside their minds, to get behind the mask of masculinity
Mhm.
that boys tend to put on, and because when boys are putting on that mask, they all feel like they can show the vulnerable parts, the insecure parts of themselves, and they keep those feelings to themselves, and then they start acting them out in destructive ways, of beating up other kids, of bullying other kids. The bully and the bullies, both the bully and the person that's bullied, are have a lot of characteristics in common, especially deep insecurities and low self-esteem. So those
Mhm.
are just a few of those examples.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the book, the list of consequences that you have related to absent fathers or low father input. I mean, you could sum it up by, it seemed to me, you could sum it up by saying pretty well anything you can measure is negatively influenced by a lack
Imagine,
of father influence.
yes, imagine going to bed at night with your wife or your husband or your same-sex partner, and you dream, and your dream is that your son's going to commit suicide, or your son's going to be more likely to be in a car accident, or your son's more likely to do something very dangerous like jump off of a bridge to prove to other people that he's not a chicken. Just doesn't just imagine that nightmare, and to know that that nightmare is so much less likely to happen if there's a significant amount of father involvement. The and you know One of the things that is really, I think, important to understand is why. What do dads do differently than what moms do? And I'll just give an example. Dads, here's like a dynamic between moms and dads that's very typical, but this is just one of about a dozen different male-female parent dynamics. Dad goes ahead and say you have three children. He takes the three kids and tosses them on the couch and says, "Okay, here's the game. The three of you just jump on my back and you see if you can pin me down before I can pin the three of you down." And mom's looking on and going, "Oh my God, I feel like I just have one more child to monitor here. Somebody's going to get hurt sooner or later. I know it. Somebody's going to watch. Somebody's going to be crying, and somebody's going to get hurt. But I don't want the kids look like they're having fun, and I don't want to be controlling, and I don't want to take over. That's going to discourage them as a parent. So I'm going to try to hold back." And so the kids jump on dad's back, and they're all having lots of fun. And all of a sudden, somebody starts crying. Maybe Janie got hit in the eye with the elbow of the older brother. And mom goes, "Oh God, I knew it. Maybe I should have paid attention to my feelings, my intuition. I should have gotten involved sooner. I should have stopped this. I don't want Janie to get hurt. She's going to have a real bad experience with feelings of association with her dad. That's not good for her. That's not good for the dad. And then she sees dad go, Jimmy, you can't stick your elbow in Janie's face. If you do that again, we're going to stop roughhousing, or you're going to be eliminated from the roughhousing. Okay, Dad. I got it. We got it. And so they go back to the roughhousing. Now, Mom's over there going, what? They just started crying. Somebody just got hurt, and you're going back to the exact same process that got the kids hurt. You must. Oh God, what can I do here? And so she watches them go back to the same process. But this time they go ahead and they do some version of the same thing. Maybe they don't stick the elbow in the sister's face, but they push the sister out of the way, or push the other brother out of the way. And so now Dad says, glad you didn't put the elbow in your sister's face, but you also can't push so hard. You can use leverage. You can use eye contact. You can fake your brother and sister out to be able to win. You just can't push them as hard as that. The father is teaching them the difference between being aggressive versus being assertive. The father is forcing the children to think about the sister and brother's needs, not just their own needs. So the data is beginning to show us that what's happening when fathers do this roughhouse is that children increase their empathy, not because they're naturally empathetic, but rather because in order to get what they want to have, the roughhousing, they've got to think of someone besides themselves. They have to think of their sister's needs, and they have to understand it more subtly. They have to see what the difference is between being aggressive, shoving their younger brother out of the way, versus being assertive, using eye contact and faking out and things that are within the rules of the game. So these then allow the children to develop social skills that lead to them feeling lead to children at school wanting to play with them, because they understand how the differences between being assertive versus aggressive. They understand the value to them personally of thinking of other people's needs and feelings rather than just their own feelings in order to win. And so they have the beginning of empathy, which is very good for social development and emotional intelligence. And now the data shows us that these things are connected to social development and emotional intelligence and empathy, but they're also connected to something else. And this happens when the next time when the child violates the gap between aggressive and assertive, and dad says, okay, I warned you, there's no more roughhousing. Then the next time we won't do roughhousing till tomorrow night. So tomorrow night comes and mom's still there saying, oh my God, twice you had the same reaction and you're allowing them to do roughhousing tomorrow night. Dads don't explain that the payoff comes the next evening. The next evening when they roughhouse, now when dad says, don't do this and don't do that, the children know that if they violate that, they're going to lose what they want, their roughhousing. And so what the children are learning is not just about the difference between being assertive and aggressive, and not just about empathy. They're learning about, excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. I kissed the frog and it didn't come into a prince. But so the father is teaching the children is postpone gratification. That is, you can't have what you want, an immediate victory, without losing something in the long run that you want even more, the roughhousing. You've got to postpone the desire to push your brother or sister aside in order to get what you really want to have, which is continued roughhousing with me. So the father is holding out that carrot, and now the children are learning the single most important predictor of success or failure, the postponed gratification. You take the postponed gratification into school, the children with it begin to be rewarded for finishing their homework, for being able to have the discipline to play a great game of soccer, what you call football, rugby, to be able to do gymnastics, to be able to do what they set out to do, to be musicians, to be great artists, because all those things take discipline. Discipline's key phenomenon is postponed gratification. The father is teaching that, whereas the mother is more likely to give that same warning. But after she gives the warning, if the children violate that warning, she'll give the same warning again. And then she'll give the same warning again. And she'll give the same warning again, a little bit louder, a little bit louder. And then maybe she'll lose her temper and make a really strong punishment for the children. And then she'll feel guilty about the punishment being so strong. And so she'll back off of it. And so we now know that children raised predominantly by moms, 30% of them have ADHD. Children raised predominantly by dads, only 15% have ADHD. And you can see the connection there, because the children raised predominantly by dads learn that they have no option but to finish what they're working on, to do what they need to do, that is not offend their sister and brother and make them cry, in order to get what they want to have. And so that postponed gratification is the key to children being successful or failing, and that and paying attention to what they need to do, which minimizes ADHD, which is attention deficit disorder. And the child with the mom who's able to manipulate a better deal by saying, "Mom, I can let me do this again. I won't do it again." And mom goes ahead and gives in. That is much more likely to not train the child to focus on what they need to focus on, but rather to have attention deficit.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think reading the book, that's an example of something that sort of comes naturally to dads. But it's great to be able to have the evidence to show the effect of it. Just to point out, in case anyone missed it, roughhousing is actually not a term we use in Britain, but just like wrestling and basically wrestling with kids, isn't it? Another thing in the book I thought was absolutely fascinating, that's illustrating the same sort of point, was the bedtime research.
Yes.
Outline that for us. As I say, it's fascinating.
Absolutely. So we often, the data shows that moms set earlier bedtimes than dads do. So moms might set it for, say, 9 o'clock, and dads will set it for 9:30. And moms will often say, well, the kids shouldn't go to bed as late as 9:30. They really need to go to bed at 9 o'clock. And so, and then as it plays out in any given evening, the dad will say, okay, if you get the bedtime's 9:30, but if whenever you get your homework done and all the chores you need to get done and cleaned up, etc., brush your teeth, from that time until 9:30, you'll get a chance to play. I'll read to you. I'll roughhouse with you. And mom's going, "You're going to roughhouse before bed? Get the kids all excited? You must be crazy," again, or wrestle and so on, or let them stay up that late. That's terrible. Now then the studies of fathers and mothers putting the children to bed find that the children actually get to bed sooner with dad's bedtime being set later than they do with moms. That with moms, the children are more likely to say something like, "I didn't finish my homework. It's 9 o'clock, I know, but you don't want me to go to school tomorrow without my homework being finished, do you, Mom?" And mom will say, "No, definitely not. Okay, sweetie, if you're going to do your homework, we'll give more time for that. Mom, I did my homework. Can you read me that story you promised? I got my homework done. Now it's 9:20." And so, okay, I don't want you to, you did your homework. I want to reward you. I'll read you your story. And it ends up being about 9:45. And so even though whereas the dads are more likely to say, "No, you didn't do your homework. I warned you that the bedtime is 9:30. That's your responsibility that you didn't do your homework. You're going to have to go in. You're going to have to get lower grades," or they get their homework done real quickly, but it's done very sloppily, and they get a bad grade. And the father says, "Okay, from now on, I look over your homework all the time before you get to play, because you didn't have the integrity to do it well." And so dads are far more likely to hold to the consequences of a child not doing something, and then give the child rewards when they do it all very well very soon. And so the kids that were getting dressed and ready with dad were more like, okay, we got to brush our teeth. Okay, we got to do this and do that. No, we have to do our homework. No, you can't do it sloppily, otherwise we won't get the, we're not going to have a chance to do the playing with dad or being read to with by dad. And so, but the most important quality that seemed to lead to the bedtimes being shorter with dads is the willingness of the dads to enforce whatever they said, and to give them extra time when the children finished their chores, etc., really well, and to cut the time exactly at 9:30, no matter what the children didn't do effectively, and not lose the things like, I haven't finished my homework, as a bribe for the children to be able to get dad to be more flexible on the bedtime. That's just another example of that.
Fascinating. Now, when I was reading your book, I found it, my thoughts went in this direction. So obviously, if the influence specifically of an absent father can be measured so precisely and so definitely, that the effects are so clear. So fathers generally have a particular style of parenting, which is complementary to the typical mother.
Yes.
So you can see the effect of the missing father. I mean, is it possible, if you, let's say, a single parent, single mum, if she were to develop or employ some of the strategies or show some of the characteristics of the typical father, would that help with the problem? Or is it the case that you actually need this complementary team to be able to bring up the child in the ideal way?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, it does help. An example of this, and it doesn't mean that the mother only can replace the father, because the child, when the child looks in the mirror, the boy looks in the mirror, he may see the body language of his dad, the hair of his dad, the nose of his dad, and so he feels like, he's wondering who he is, and so the child benefits a great deal from sort of seeing the biological dad connected to him and with him. That having been said, if it's impossible for whatever reason to bring the biological father into an equal amount of involvement with the children, there are other options. One is a stepdad. Stepdads are usually enormously underused in most families, particularly if you have daughters and your stepdad is a stepdad to the daughters. Usually the mothers are more protective of the daughters. The mothers are more soft love, dad is more tough love. And when a stepdad comes on board, the mother often interprets the tough love of the dad as something that is happening because the dad doesn't love the children as much. So one of the core understandings with the stepfather or for any mother and father is to realize that both parents, both mother and father, have what I call unconditional love. But we recognize the unconditional love as being unconditional love for the mother. But dad's unconditional love is often not recognized because it comes with conditional approval. But part of that conditional approval is dad's style of loving unconditionally and being able to set tough boundaries and enforcing those boundaries, even when the child doesn't like those boundaries and starts crying, which looks like that child does not have the father's unconditional love. But that's the father showing integrity to know what he knows will help that child grow up more responsibly by showing his love in that way. It's a huge misunderstanding between mothers and fathers. None of this is mother's fault. Moms can't hear what dads don't say. I don't know any dad who says something like, I want to wrestle with the children because it will increase their empathy. Well, it's almost nobody, and if they did say that, the mother would look at him like, now I know it's crazy. And so that is some of the value of really knowing the research and presenting it in a gentle, caring, loving way to mom. And so that the mom and dad can work out what I call checks and balance parenting. So for example, typically, a child might say, Mom, can I climb the tree in the backyard? And mom will go, well, sweetie, you're a little young for that. Maybe in a couple of years, check with me again, and maybe we can let you climb the tree then. So the child will run to dad and say, can I climb the tree in the backyard? And dad says, Yeah, but be careful. It's a little bit high for you, sweetie. But just so be really careful. And then the kid goes out and runs to climb the tree, and mom goes, "What is this? I just told you couldn't climb the tree. Dad said I could." So dad and mom start talking with each other, and they may have an argument because they're not realizing that their differences need to be sort of compromised, worked with. They
Yeah.
both have something valuable to offer. The mom is offering protection and making sure the child does not get a concussion by falling from the tree. And so the father and mother might work out something like, okay, the child can climb the tree, but not up beyond these branches here, and not in this part of the tree, which has very weak branches. And you got to be underneath the tree to make sure that if Jimmy or Janie falls, that you can cushion the fall and maybe catch Jimmy or Janie. And by the way, here's your cell phone. You always get distracted when you use these cell phones. So give me the cell phone, and now you can do it. And so what the child has gotten is the best of both worlds: the excitement of climbing the tree, and also the safety. However, virtually no father understands or is able to say when that child climbs the tree and takes risks of discerning which branch to go on, which one not to go on. The child is both increasing its psychomotor functioning, and that creates a connection of synapses, which actually increases the child's IQ. So I've never heard a dad say that to mom. And so that's the type of stuff. When I did the research on this for the boy crisis, I kept finding over and over again things that fathers do unwittingly. But, I started to sort of talk with dads about this once. And then dad said, well, I've never read this before. So I looked through a slew of parenting magazines and parenting books, and it wasn't in any parenting magazine or any parenting book. So, moms can't hear what dads don't say, but dads can't hear what the literature doesn't say, or what, even if they do read the literature. And so this is the dilemma that we're in with boys, and one of the reasons why so many boys are doing so very, very poorly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think with the complementary qualities of the parents, I think that's something that will have existed throughout human history. There will have been those natural differences in parenting styles. I think it's probably exacerbated at the moment. But certainly in Scotland, the culture is to see the mother as the ideal parent.
Yes.
The ideal dad is the one who can be most like a mum.
Mm-hmm.
That's the general understanding. So whereas you're going to have this creative tension naturally, it's sort of a bit skewed by the culture as well at the moment. If you like, to sort of empower the mother to feel more confident in saying this is the way you ought to be doing it. But just going back to what you were saying before, I mean, would it be a fair summary of what you're saying, that the reason dads are important is partly because they tend to bring a specific style of parenting? That's a very important contribution. But is there also an element as well that it's important for there to be the male role model, to be developing a relationship with a man in order for that to translate into positive relationships with men in the future?
Absolutely. There's a lot going on here. And, historically speaking, to be a man, you had a number of things happening. Almost every generation had its war. And so a boy learned that you could be a man by joining that war, by being disposable. Or you could be a man by being a full-time breadwinner. And, if you had to work in coal mines and you got black lung disease and you died earlier, you'd at least be respected in the family. And so boys learned that they had, the bad news was that the good news was that they had a sense of purpose. They could be a hero in war, or they could be a sole breadwinner. And today there are fewer boys/men needed in war, and women are sharing more of the responsibilities for earning the income. So boys being a sole breadwinner is no longer as important as it was. So the good news is fewer boys are killed and fewer boys are sort of constrained to being sole breadwinner. The bad news is there's a purpose void. Now, when you have a purpose void and a dad void combined, that's where the trouble really begins. The purpose void allows a boy with a dad to work with the mom to discover the boy's unique self, to discover, my son is more naturally sort of gentle. He's like, he likes playing with dolls. My son is more naturally wanting to play with that fire truck. And so, let's work with him to both balance his propensities, but also to nurture his propensities and to find out what, really makes him blossom, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the boy is predominantly with the mom, and the mom sees that, let's say the boy is good at singing and he's good at music, and says, "Okay, sweetie, you should go in school and and be enter the talent show, and and show them how you can play your guitar and the music. And I know you can't play the guitar now, but we'll give you some special lessons for that. You'll be able to play." But the boy doesn't have that postponed gratification. And so dads tend to bring that the tough love says to boys, you're not going to be able to play the guitar and do well in the in that talent show if you don't stay home and practice the guitar. And we're not going to give you lessons privately if you don't practice what the teacher assigns.
Mm-hmm.
And so and then when the child does not practice what the teacher assigns, the music teacher assigns, dad is perfectly willing to stop the lessons. Mom will often think that's cruel. The child should get more lessons because then you'll nurture his skills. And dad is more likely to put the responsibility on the child to discipline himself. But then the child is nurtured and directed and encouraged by mom to pursue his dreams. But the dad role is the discipline to make those dreams happen. When you pursue dreams and you fail in one dream after the other because you don't have that discipline, you ultimately end up with the problem that the boy becomes afraid to dream, because every time he's dreamt before, he's been a failure. So he told other people that he would enter that talent show, and he did enter the talent show, but he looked like a fool, and he didn't do as well as other people. And now he's afraid of even telling people he has a dream, because if he says that and then he fails at it, he looks like a fool again. And so that's an example of the positive tension between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting. The boy who has that dad gets the encouragement of mom to do the dreaming and the discipline of dad to make that dream happen.
Yeah, fascinating. So we've established conclusively that father absence is a problem. So as a political party, so what are the ways forward? What are the ways of tackling it? Roughly speaking, there's two issues. One would be where the father is in the home, but isn't engaging properly or fully or whatever with the children. And the other one, which I think is a much more serious issue, is when the father isn't in the home for whatever reason. Start with the first one first, though. I mean, do you feel that that is a serious issue, that there are homes where the father is present, but is neglecting the children?
Yes. And we see this in many people who have grown up with minimal or no father involvement. In the old days, it was sort of quasi expected. The father, fathers experience, especially successful fathers experience what I call the father's catch-22. They learn to love the family by being away from the love of the family. And in the old days, when men were sole breadwinners, that was just expected. So you didn't have one father taking his kids out camping and playing with his kids and playing ball with the kids, and then your son saw, Jimmy and Jane down the street playing ball with their fathers, or the father taking them swimming. The father's doing a lot, so they didn't feel so badly. They learned that the role of the dad, was to take care of the family economically. That was just an expectation. Today, children can see that that other kids in school have their father doing things with them. And that makes them feel like, maybe I'm not so important to my dad. And so that can result in a number of things: a child withdrawing and being depressed, or it can result in some children really trying to stand out by getting their dad's attention. Stephen Paddock, who was the mass shooter who killed 57 people in Los Angeles, had a father that was in prison, and the father didn't come out of prison. He decided to escape the prison, in the maximum security prison, and prove to the world what a genius he was. And the son, Stephen Paddock, felt like, my God, my dad didn't care enough to stay in prison, finish his term, and then return to me. And so he tried to prove that he was a genius like his dad was, and he orchestrated the largest mass shooting in U.S. history. And so the point there being that a boy without a lot of father involvement, or without a father at all, may become successful in his own way, but it's successful out of trying to prove to his dad that I'm worthy of your attention. And that's success with a huge internal psychological price. And so that happens whether the father is minimally involved or absent completely from the family. However, the damage to boys who don't have the father in the family at all, or who have the father in the family for 3 or 4 years, and then a divorce happens, those boys often feel abandoned. They have attachment to their father that then gets destroyed. They have a lack of trust. They have so many things that happen for them that are very, very destructive. And so that ends up being a bigger problem. And you see this with the married women in the United States who have children, with where they're just living with the man, but they're not married to them. The average living relationship, where there's no marriage, only lasts between 3 and 4 years. And so the children eventually lose contact with their dad, or have minimum contact with their dad. And those children really suffer a great deal. I feel like I need to, because you were talking about policies, and here's what I was able to discover in the research for the boy crisis is 4 things that I call the 4 must-dos of divorce. And these need to be translated into political policy and social expectation. If a divorce is absolutely necessary, there are 4 must-dos that lead to children doing reasonably well after divorce. Number 1 is an equal amount of time of the children with both the mother and the father. Number 2 is that the mom and dad live within about 20 minutes drive time from each other, but not on the same block or within very easy walking distance for the children. So the children can't just say, oh, I don't like what you did, I'm going to go over to dad's house, type of thing, and use that against the parent. So within 20 minutes drive time from each other. Number 3, that the children are not able to detect any bad mouthing from mother to father, or about father, or from father about mother. Bad mouthing is one of the cruelest forms of child abuse that you can do. And number 4 is that the children who do the best are ones whose parents are involved in consistent relationship counseling or couples counseling, not emergency-based counseling, but consistent counseling, so that the mother and father can share the best intent of why the father let the child go play in a playground on Sunday while he watched the football game, that was not a sign of neglect of the child or not caring about the child, but a sign of trust that the child would work something out. And maybe if the child came back after a fight, that isn't a sign of neglect, but if a father is talking to that child that came back, got a fight on the playground, that's the father's way of being able to say, okay, what were the red flags that got you into a fight? Oh, you saw that one of the kids was pushing somebody else around. That's a red flag. The next time you see somebody pushing somebody else around, what are you going to do about that? And so the father tends to believe that having the child have a real life experience that results in some negative outcome, but not a huge negative outcome, he'd rather have the child do that when the child is in his care, so he can talk about how to prevent it the next time, rather than have the child protected, and then suddenly leaves the home and enters a world where there are bullies and people that will take advantage of him.
But do you think some element of counseling, or at the very least, just sort of listening to a presentation with the sort of advice you've been given there, could that be built into the divorce process for parents with kids?
Yes, it can be. I'd say this: if we care about boys and girls, The single most important thing is not creating laws that prevent people from divorcing, but
Hmm.
creating couples communication skill sets that overcome the biological propensity to not be able to hear our partner's criticism without becoming defensive.
Yeah.
As we speak every day here, I have been working for the last couple of weeks on putting onto Zoom a course that I've been developing over the last 30 years on couples communication. And I started developing that course because I saw that, the boy crisis often results from there being a divorce and the father is lost. And so, and the single biggest problem that leads to the single biggest Achilles heel of all human beings is our inability to handle personal criticism from a loved one without becoming defensive.
Hmm.
And so when you can't handle personal criticism from your partner without becoming defensive, your partner becomes fearful of bringing new concerns up. And so both the man and the woman start walking on eggshells. Gay couples, same issue happens. It doesn't make any difference whether you're straight or gay. And so then you start keeping your negative feelings to yourself, and they build up and they build up and they build up. And one day something happens that's a little bit more extreme, and you come out and you attack your partner, and your partner attacks you back, and you have a huge escalation, which convinces you you're really not right for each other. That leads to filing for a divorce or whatever. And so so I finally, with Zoom technology, I've been able to develop a Zoom course on couples communication so that every family can have this for virtually no money, as opposed to people only who are wealthy being able to afford to come to my workshops.
That's one of our policies actually, is to have relationship counseling available in order to help couples to stay together.
If the Scottish Family Party was able to do just one thing, it would be having the couples communication counseling being available to every single family, no matter how poor they are, so that there isn't the divorce to begin with, so that doesn't result in a lack of father involvement. That is the core issue. And that's where the conservatives are in the United States are a little bit more reluctant. They tend to not see the value of the couples communication counseling as much as liberals do, but liberals tend not to understand the value of father nearly as much as conservatives do. So we're caught between a rock and a hard place here.
So we've already got relationship counseling as part of our policies, but we haven't thought of it as a more routine thing. I was going to say that there's quite a fathers' rights movement in Scotland. So a lot of fathers feel that they're cut out of their children's lives against their will through what they say is unfair court decisions. What they say happens is you go to court and acrimonious divorce, and the wife wants to basically keep the kid to herself. She wants to cut the father out. And so the wife is counseled by various women's charities, so domestic abuse charities. And the men often suggest that these charities sort of virtually coach the women on the lines to bring out in the hearings. And then they do that, and then the fathers are cut out. And I've spoken to quite a few of them. A fair few, I would say, are so angry and hurt by the whole thing, they can barely talk about it. It's really, it's very sad to see the situation they're in. And I think there's a huge number of men in that boat at the moment. Having said that, there is a bill in the Scottish Parliament at the moment that's making equally shared parenting the assumption in all custody decisions, which I think is a big step forward for that. I think they have responded to that to some degree. But in terms of keeping families together, another element of our policies is to, through various means, to encourage marriage, to encourage a culture of marriage within society. Is that something that you would support as well?
Yes, yes, and yes. When it is absolutely essential, if there is a divorce, for the father and mother to be about equally involved. And it's also absolutely essential that we help families all around the world understand that there really is a value to families, that families do keep When children have a stable feeling that dad and mom are both together, and I'm going to have a dad and mom while I'm working, while I'm growing up, those children just plain do better. They do better in school in every single academic subject, especially they do better in reading and writing. And boys in particular are especially hurt. Almost all, when boys have the trauma of not having a father, that trauma leads them, that trauma makes them much more prone to having their much greater level of testosterone. When poorly channeled, that testosterone becomes one of the most destructive forces in the world. Whereas when that testosterone is well channeled by both a mother and father doing checks and balance parenting, and the boy and the girl having the security of knowing mom and dad are together, even though they make it into some arguments, they're still together, they're still here for me. That leads to the children doing so much better on every level. But boys, unlike girls, boys who are traumatized by not having their father around, boys who hurt us. Our prisons are filled with criminals that are 93% likely to be males, but 85 to 90% of those males are dad-deprived males. When I was when I ran for governor of California about in 2003 in a recall election, I went around and spoke to prison populations, and I talked to them about the importance of fathers. And these often tough prisoners, many of them started crying and just saying, I just never knew I had importance to my children. I just thought I was the bad apple, that the longer probably I stayed in prison, the better it was for my family. I didn't know I had such value. I got correspondence from some of the people who were administrators in the prison, in those prisons, saying that those prisoners, some of them, not all of them, did a major turnaround when they realized that they could go home to their children and make a positive contribution. So there's two things here happening. One is how even in the prison population, when a father who's a prisoner heard that he could be useful, heard that he could be needed, heard that he had value, his life turned around. Men need to know that they're valued. So part of the what we need to do is realize that men were willing to die in every generation's war when we told them they were needed in that war. And so if men are told they're needed as fathers, they are going to be willing to step up, because that's the way men are. When domestic violence councils tell women that you should get a divorce and the family should be broken up, that makes the children more vulnerable to domestic violence. That makes the children more vulnerable to every type of trauma and violence, which then makes the society more vulnerable to the crimes. It's not just in the United States. We have ISIS recruits. Those ISIS recruits are about 90% male. But among those 90% male, about 85 to 90% of them, both the males and the females, by the way, are dad-deprived children, not just dad-deprived males. And we have the same type of thing with the mass shooters. In the United States, since in the 21st century, there have been 5 mass shooters that have killed 10 or more people. I'm sorry, I said 5 mass shooters. I meant 5 school shooters that are mass shooters that killed 10 or more people. Every single one of those were dad-deprived children, where we're able to trace the background of them. And the mass shooters as a whole, about 85% as a rule, 85 to 90% are dad-deprived children, where we're able to trace the backgrounds of those shooters. Yeah. So boys who hurt us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no better way of promoting domestic violence than the way the Domestic Violence Council is supposedly preventing it.
Yeah. I find it so frustrating to hear politicians trying to address these issues while completely ignoring what's obviously a major factor in them. I mean, this is not the whole story. Obviously, there's other factors as well, but this is a very big piece of the jigsaw, if you like, and yet it's entirely neglected. Now, what compounds the problem in Scotland is not just that there's not interest, there's not focus on these areas. It's the fact that often the data doesn't even exist. Because, I mean, reading your book, the fantastic data on this subject. But in Scotland, who's motivated to be collecting this data? I mean, the mainstream political parties are not motivated to collect it. The university departments are not motivated to collect this data. So it's a bit of a data desert. So we rely on people such as yourself who unearth the issue in other contexts, and we just have to translate that. I mean, it's obviously going to be the same in all developed countries. That's quite a challenge for us. I mean, have you got any tips for that? So how can we work around that?
Well, first of all, we have to realize how important it is, and and we have this big Black Lives Matter happening in the country, and everyone's talking about is it the police and the police and the police. And yes, it's important to address police unions and the degree to which police unions protect police. And it's important to look at the false data that police use to protect themselves. And it's important to acknowledge the experience of almost every Black person, but especially Black males who are driving in a neighborhood and who are looked upon suspiciously and pulled over because of a broken taillight or something else as an excuse. And those are all important things. But if we if we really feel that Black Lives Matter, which I certainly do, if we really feel that, then we have to understand that Black dads matter. That we need, that when Moynihan did his big study in the United States in 1965, and he looked at the inner city and why there were so many crimes, and people were expecting him to find, oh my gosh, he's going to maybe accuse Black people of being inherently bad because they are the ones that commit more crimes in the inner city. He found quite a different finding. And the finding was that in the inner city, Black males were families, they were only 25% of them did not have father involvement. And it was not the Black families where the problems were arising. It was that 25% of Black families where there was minimal or no father involvement, what I call in the Boy Crisis book, dad deprivation. And so now the percentage of families that are African American that do not have dads is up to 75%. The percentage of Caucasian families where there is minimal or no father involvement is up to 32%, higher than it was among Black families in 1965. And again, that section of the Caucasian families is the section where we have boys who are failures to launch, boys who are taking the drugs, boys who are withdrawing into video game addiction, boys who are addicted to opioids, boys who are addicted to porn, boys who are coming home and living in their parents' homes in the basement, boys that very few girls want to associate with, boys who don't know how to be strong, but also are oftentimes either too weak or too strong. They don't know how to be appropriate, don't have emotional intelligence. The whole slew of problems that I was just overwhelmed by in the 14 years of research that I sort of, every year I started thinking, all right, the end of my research for the boy crisis, and then I'd find new data that would lead me to something else. And it was like just astonishing to me about there can be really no party that is serving Scotland more functionally than the Scottish Family Party. This is getting to the core, the prison population, the other issues that you deal with. Those are the symptoms. But if you really want to cure the things that create the symptoms, you start with making a strong family, of understanding that marriage really does create a bond between the couple that gets married, has all of the, actually, let me stop here and reprogram that last sentence. People often say, well, isn't marriage just a piece of paper? Actually, it is not just a piece of paper. Here's what happens in the brain. We have a part of our brain called the RCZ, which is the rostral cingulate zone. The rostral cingulate zone increases dopamine when we get a social approval. This is what allows societies to survive by saying, we need to send our boys to fight for Scotland. We'll call you a hero if you do. Those social bribes lead to Scotland being able to be strong enough to defend itself. Well, when you have a marriage and you invite all your relatives and your best friends to see you and your partner make a commitment to be together for life, to be together through better and for worse, that commitment has an impact on your brain. It imprints saying, if I don't figure out a way of keeping us together, I will sort of feel ashamed, or I will feel that I disappointed my family, my friends. Your brain works to take the ceremony, the ritual of marriage, and that seems like just a piece of paper, but it works to help create a solidifying energy that is more likely to help you through the tough times because you've made a commitment to friends and family that you would do that. And so that is the value of marriage per se.
Yeah. Well, I think we've reached a great conclusion there. I've really enjoyed talking to you and very much appreciate you taking some of your time to be with us and sharing your thoughts. If you're watching this, do look at the link below if you want to buy Dr. Farrell's book. I'll put the link to Neil's book with Dr. Farrell's chapter in as well. But great to talk to you.
Thank you. Let me just say one thing about the boy crisis.
Thank you very much for your input.
Thank you. Richard, may I just say one thing about the boy crisis? Many dads say to me that they're not that big on reading, but they're great on listening, and so that it is available in audible form. And so if you have a commute or you're going somewhere to the gym or something like that, it's very easy just to listen to in the audible form as well.
I'll find a link for that below as well. So
it's really great to talk with you. You are doing such important work. I really hope that you become represented in the Scottish Parliament and are able to articulate, I think, the single most important message that needs to be out there in the public.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much.